The reality is when you align just along, if we're going to just specifically talk about white people for a second, okay? If we just talk about aligning just across race, we are seeing the divisions happening right now. The white billionaires, Elon Musk is not saying, yes, I'm fighting for the little guy. Yes, I'm out here, you know, looking out for the forgotten white man. He is saying these folks are mediocre and let me get somebody else to do it, which is...
Yes, yes, yes. We're on the Young Turks channel today, and they're doing their usual thing where they talk shit about anchors on the mainstream media. Today it's on about, they're talking about MSNBC and somebody called, oh God, I've forgotten her name already. It's not Joy Reid, Symone Sanders is her name, I believe. And as you just heard what she was saying there, she mentioned identity politics and class-based politics. Well, they're similar, I suppose, kind of the same in a way. Everybody in America is, well, typically the Republicans are always saying, we're against identity politics, the so-called conservatives in America who, in my opinion, haven't conserved a damn thing, basically, and are therefore useless. But, you know, we got to get away from identity politics. Well, the game is identity politics, boys. The Democrats unashamedly, unabashedly embrace identity politics. They promote it. It's always about representation of this group or that group. And if that's the game in town, then that's the game you got to play. If that's, you know, none of this, oh, we don't believe in identity politics. You know, I think you'll find, this is going to be controversial, some of you might not like this, if the Democrats are going to play the, well, we represent, you know, blacks and Latinos and trans people and minorities of all sorts, whether it's ethnic minorities or gender minorities or whatever, then the Republicans should be the big boys and say, oh, okay, well, we represent white people. Yeah. And if anybody likes the countries and societies created by people of European descent, otherwise known as white people. Maybe they should say European descent or European Americans, something like that, because white always triggers people, the word white. But, you know, if you like living in a society, this society, in fact, which was created and which ran very well, it was created by people of European descent and ran very well. And since 1965, when the idea of specifically changing our immigration policies so that it would change the demographics of the country, if you think that has not led to improvements, then, well, maybe you should vote for us. You know, just because we represent, you know, our base is European Americans doesn't mean we exclude non-European Americans. But if that's what, you know, but you just acknowledge that Europeans in Europe and Europeans, descendants of Europeans in America and the Anglosphere, they build the societies that everybody wants to go to, don't they? That's just, you know, all the immigrants, they're not going from America or from Europe to the developing world, very, very few. They're trying to get into the Anglosphere and into Europe. So just embrace it. I think that's going to have to happen. Let's get into, let's see what the Young Turks have to say about this, Ana Kasparian and Cenk Uygur.
Well, Symone Sanders, who has worked on both Bernie Sanders's and Joe Biden's campaigns, has an interesting piece of information that she has learned from this past election. And I think she's right about this. So take it away.
This has literally been going on since Fred Hampton, but I mean, Reverend Justice Jackson, Dr. King, right? Heck, Bernie Sanders talked about organizing across class as well.
He did. And that is something that Symone Sanders is now giving Senator Bernie Sanders a lot of credit for, even though she previously spoke against it. But it's okay. Once you come to the right conclusion, you deserve credit. Now, she made that passionate point and defended Bernie Sanders over the weekend, focusing on how, look, there needs to be more organizing and more messaging on class-based politics as opposed to identity-based politics. And so Symone Sanders used to work for Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign in 2016. And we are glad to see her fighting for him now because, again, a few years back, she was actually taking shots at him for sharing that same message. And we're going to get to that in just a minute. But first, Cenk, initial thoughts.
Yeah, look, I feel bad sometimes criticizing folks. I know how that feels. But there's a lot of Johnny-come-latelys with epiphanies without apologies, right? So a lot of identity politics was played in the Democratic Party. We'll come back and talk more about that after Ana gives you the rest of the story.
So the clip we just showed you is just a small piece of what Symone Sanders had to say about class. So for context, she was actually responding to the ongoing fight within MAGA over H-1B immigration visas. And so with that in mind, here's more context of what she was saying.
The reality is when you align just along, if we're going to just specifically talk about white people for a second, okay? If we just talk about aligning just across race, we are seeing the divisions happening right now. The white billionaires, Elon Musk is not saying, yes, I'm fighting for the little guy. Yes, I'm out here, looking out for the forgotten white man. He is saying these folks are mediocre and let me get somebody else to do it, which is why folks, white, black, Latino, Native American, Asian American, and Pacific Islander and otherwise, we have to look at organizing across class, okay? Because the reality is what they said, as Michael said, what they said about black people all those years ago, and they still trying to say it about us, to be very clear. Now they're saying it out loud about people who are not black, about you.
I mean, this is the reason why politicians advocating for universal economic policies tend to perform better in political polling. They tend to get reelected. It's messaging that appeals to a broader group of voters.
Yeah, it obviously would seem to make sense in a society with lots of different groups, whether they're ethnic groups, racial groups, religious groups, whatever, different communities, that you as a politician would try to appeal to them. But this is the problem with a multicultural society, where there's not an overwhelming main group. For example, in the United States, the overwhelming group until 1965 was white people. So basically people of European descent who came to America, and yeah, many of them were immigrants. So many of them, of course, were descendants of the original settlers, and then many more came as immigrants. And but they were Europeans. And they came as immigrants at a time when coming as an immigrant was hard work. Like it was a big decision to leave your village in Italy or wherever, or Norway or Sweden, and come to America, because it was like you're burning bridges. There was no going back. Yeah. You managed to get the money together to get passage across the ocean, and you weren't given anything. And if some others had already come before you, from Italy or Sweden, yeah, you might have a bit of help that way. They sort of, these groups like in New York City tended to form little sort of self-help societies, but there were no government handouts. There was no smartphone handed to you when you crossed the border with an app on it to tell you when your asylum hearing was, or no. There was none of that. So the people who came under circumstances like that were people who were prepared to make a go of it and basically had to succeed one way or another. That's a completely different situation from today, from these immigrants or migrants or so-called refugees, so-called asylum seekers who are coming. So in any case, my point is that the overwhelming preponderant group in America were people of European descent, white people, until 1965, and that has been steadily going down. And so you direct all your messaging at those people, of course. It makes it easy when you're a politician, and that's the way it should be. And everybody else who comes, the few immigrants from non-European countries who are allowed in, well, they just have to get with the program and assimilate. Or, they could form Chinatown type places. That's fine. Nobody has a problem with Chinatown. They know they're never going to be European, but others come and they assimilate. But when you start fracturing it, where then you just have groups like okay, there's 20% of this group and 40% of this group and 30% of this group, 10% of this group, then you get problems like they're discussing now. Then you start breaking things down into identity politics. Let's get back into it some more here.
That the elites had was, if we just put a couple of Black and Latino people at the very top, that'll help them. Our idea was, why don't we actually give them higher wages and healthcare? That'll help them a lot more. And then, no, you're hurting vulnerable communities. No, we're not. You're hurting them. But that's just a line that people use to privilege their own perspective and their own position within the Democratic Party and the left wing. So none of this helped. It's elementary politics that you serve all voters, not just some voters, if you'd like to get more of them. Elementary.
Yeah, I mean, look, diversity of thought is not something that seems to be celebrated by the Democratic Party. And so I think that's an issue. And look, just to give you a perfect example, I mean, think about what happened with the California Senate seat after Senator Dianne Feinstein passed away during her final term. I mean, at that point, California Governor Gavin Newsom was able to appoint someone to that vacant seat until the election was held. And Barbara Lee, a Black Democrat who was planning on running for that seat, wanted to be a contender, wanted to be chosen. And she was known for her progressive politics. And guess what? Her representation was not something that was favored by Gavin Newsom and the corporate wing of the Democratic Party. So there you have it. But I do want to talk a little bit about where Symone Sanders was on this issue back in 2019. Because as I mentioned, she did work for Senator Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign in 2016. But by 2019, she became a senior advisor for the Biden campaign. And so apparently she took issue with something that Bernie Sanders had said during an interview with GQ. So let me first start with what Senator Sanders said, and then I'll get to her response. Again, this was in 2019. So Senator Sanders said, there are people who are very big into diversity, but whose views end up being not particularly sympathetic to working people, whether they're white or Black or Latino. My main belief is that we need to bring together a coalition of people, of Black and white and Latino and Asian American and Native American, around a progressive agenda, which is prepared to take on an extraordinarily powerful ruling class in this country. That's my view.
Well, that actually sounds pretty reasonable. I mean, I agree. In this case, I have to admit, I agree with what Bernie Sanders is saying. And I think the Young Turks, Ana and Cenk will agree also that, first of all, diversity, this whole idea of diversity is completely meaningless. But leaving that aside, yes, I do believe that the bigger fight is between ordinary people, and ordinary people, there's many classes, socioeconomic classes of ordinary people, but the fight is between them and the oligarchs. We absolutely now have oligarchs in the United States. And yeah, I think people are waking up. You know, I have to admit, most of my life, I never really thought about it like that. You know, of course, lefties it's always about, we gotta take down the power, take down the man. But the problem is with the lefty approach is a lot of them would just want to burn down everything because it's steeped in, systemic racism, systemic patriarchy and all that. Yeah, patriarchy got us this good society that we created exactly in the first place. But I'm certainly no anarchist or even libertarian because you do need controls. You need regulations and controls, and somebody's got to police this whole thing. Otherwise, corporations or individuals will just get out of control. They will totally get out of control if allowed to do so.
Many of my opponents do not hold that view, and they think that all that we need is people who are candidates who are Black or white, who are Black or Latino or women or gay, regardless of what they stand for, that the end result is diversity. Wow,
pretty based of Bernie Sanders back in 2019. Yeah, I can imagine that a lot of lefties or, progressives, liberals didn't like that at all. Yeah, because basically he's saying diversity is nonsense. That's basically what he's saying there. They just want diversity for the sake of diversity, but it's completely meaningless. Why not have decent policies, or at least policies that we can present to people and say these will help these groups of people.
And then Bernie hastened to add that diversity is enormously important, but there was a bigger goal to change society and create an economy and a government that work for all people.
Of course, he had to cuck immediately afterwards and say diversity is enormously important. No, it's not. The world is a diverse place, Bernie and Young Turks and liberals and all that. The world is diverse. Not every single country has to be diverse. Not every single city or state or community has to be diverse. Far from it. Diversity is the opposite of a strength.
Symone Sanders took issue with that statement, even though she seems to agree with it today. Back then, in February of 2019, she responded by saying, has he learned lessons since 2016? Yes. He has been actively working since 2016 to reach out to various communities, to be on the ground and listen to folks. He has been to South Carolina a few times, which is really important. But some of the language is going to be problematic. Nobody is saying that, and in a race where there are Latinos and women and Black women, people will use it against him. I don't care how many times you go to South Carolina. You say things like you said to GQ because you think it's appealing. It's alienating to some folks. As a young Black millennial, I don't like hearing it because it speaks to a fundamental misunderstanding about race and gender and what people are looking for. So what are people looking for, Symone Sanders? I mean, like...
Yeah, very good question. Well, what are they looking for? Well, people like her, apparently, are looking for... Yeah, they're looking to be pandered to. They're looking to place their victim status above yours, you know. They deserve something more because, you know, they're at a certain place on the victim status totem pole. You know, Symone Sanders is a Black woman. Maybe she's gay, too. Maybe she's a gay Black woman. Maybe she's actually a trans woman. Gay, Black, trans woman. All these things. It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And... you know, it's good to see that the Young Turks are against that, and kind of heartening to see that Bernie Sanders was too. Or if not actively against it, at least they're pointing out that Ed is no way to get votes. So who knows what will happen? Let me know what you think in the comments. I find this interesting. There's a lot going on right now at the beginning of this year of 2025. So I think it's going to be an interesting year, and I hope you will be here with me watching more videos, liking and subscribing, commenting, doing all those good things. In the meantime, I will see you in the next one.